And this guy that I talked about, Craufurd, he's pretty significant. And here's a little talk about Craufurd. Craufurd seemed to sniff the sound of battle from afar with peculiar feelings. He halted us for a few minutes occasionally when the distant clamor became more distinct, and his face turned toward the sound and seemed to light up and become less stern. It was then, indeed, that every poor fellow clutched his weapon more firmly and wished for a sight of the enemy. Before long, they had their wish. The enemy's cavalry were on our skirts that night, and as we rushed out of the small village, we turned to bay. So even though they're retreating, they're still having to fight. And this guy Craufurd is definitely a powerful leader. Back to the book. I remember one evening during the retreat, he detected 2 men straying away from the main body. It was in the early stage of that disastrous flight, and Craufurd knew well that he must do his utmost to keep the division together. He halted the brigade with a voice of thunder, ordered a drumhead court-martial on the instant, and they were sentenced to 100 apiece. Whilst a hasty trial was taking place, Craufurd, dismounting from his horse, stood in the midst, looking stern and angry as a worried bulldog. He did not like retreating at all, that man. They march a little bit further, and then back to the book. Ordering a square to be formed, he spoke to the brigade, as well as I can remember, in these words, after having ordered the 3 before named men of the 95th to be brought into the square. Although, he said, I should obtain the goodwill neither of the officers nor the men of the brigade here by doing so, I am resolved to punish these 3 men according to the sentence awarded, even though the French are at our heels. Begin with Daniel Howans. So these guys looked like they were going to desert, and they got caught, and he had a court-martial on the spot and going to give them 100 lashes or whatever the number was. And even though they're running and retreating, he's, all right, we're going to administer this punishment now. Even though it's not popular, I got to do it. Back to the book. This was indeed no time to be lax in discipline, and the general knew it. The men, as I said, were some of them, becoming careless and ruffianly in their demeanor, whilst others, again, I saw with the tears falling down their cheeks from the agony of their bleeding feet, and many were ill with dysentery and from the effects of bad food they had got a hold of and devoured on the road. Our knapsacks, too, were a bitter enemy in this prolonged march. Many a man died, I am convinced, who would have borne up well to the end of the retreat but for the infernal load we carried on our backs. My own knapsack was my bitterest enemy. I felt it press me to the earth almost at times, and more than once felt as if I should die under its deadly embrace. The knapsacks, in my opinion, should have been abandoned at the very commencement of the retrograde movement, as it would have been better to have lost them altogether if, by such loss, we could have saved the poor fellows who, as it was, died strapped to them on the road. There was some difficulty in finding a place to tie Howans up, as the light brigade carried no halberts. However, they led him to a slender ash tree which grew near at hand. "Don't trouble yourselves about tying me up," said Howans, folding his arms. "I'll take my punishment like a man." He did so without a murmur, receiving the whole 300. His wife, who was present with us, I remember, was a strong, hardy Irish woman. So don't worry about tying me up. You hit me 300 times. We had a, they do the whipping thing with the, when you get your belt. Yeah. Do you remember Irish John? He tall, pretty lanky, and real good at jiu-jitsu. And he got his blue belt. Mm-hmm. And he walked through the whipping hallway to get his belt.
The gauntlet.
He walked through the gauntlet. He just walked and stopped at each person and gave them the opportunity to give them all they got. Yeah. That was pretty legit. He sounds like my boy Howans right here. Mm-hmm. more about Craufurd right here. This is classic. They're getting to a river. They got to cross a river on their retreat. Back to the book. Presently he spied an officer who, to save himself from being wet through, I supposed, and wearing a damp pair of breeches for the remainder of the day, had mounted on the back of one of his men. The sight of such a piece of effeminacy was enough to raise the choler of the general, and in a very short time he was plunging and splashing through the water after them both. "Put him down, sir, put him down. I desire you to put that officer down instantly." And the soldier, in an instant, I dare say, Loth dropping his burden like a hot potato into the stream, continued his progress through. "Return back, sir," said Craufurd to the officer, "and go through the water like the others. I will not allow my officers to ride upon the men's back through the rivers. All must take their share alike here." You can just go ahead and note that down as how to lead. That's a metaphorical and literal example. Hey, I'm going to ride on the back of my enlisted man so that I can stay dry. What a savage. I think that guy should have gotten some lashes. Back to the book. General Craufurd was indeed one of the few men who was apparently created for the command during such dreadful scenes as we were familiar with in this retreat. He seemed an iron man. Nothing daunted him. Nothing turned him from his purpose. War was his very element, and toil and danger seemed to call forth an increasing determination to surmount them. Legit.